Well, hello, it's Ben here with the DIY Homefront, and a lot of times I don't get around to showing you what the project looks like till about halfway through. But this time you'll get to see the table up front, and then we'll work out how we got there. Well, it might have awful short legs, and it's a little bit under countertop height, but it keeps everything inside dry, and that makes for one useful garden table. Well, this is the old garden table, and it's made from a metal door that I replaced probably about 8 or 9 years ago. The legs that the door is sitting on are actually recycled fence posts. You know, when they rot just right where the wood meets the ground, but the rest of the post above ground is good? Well, I recycled a bunch of fence posts and made the legs. Now, I spent quite a bit of time disassembling it, thinking that I might be able to use the legs or some part of this table, but it was completely gone. So let's get rid of this table and we'll move on to the one that's replacing it. Well, if you like this video, you might want to check out my playlist, The Things I Build. You never know what's going to be next. Well, like usual, I haven't finished one project and I'm already starting another. I've got to make a table for my wife for the garden, and this table is going to end up using something I've had sitting around in the backyard for probably 10 years. A big aluminum box. So let me show you. Well, there you go, one big aluminum box. It's 65 inches long, 31 inches wide, and 19 inches deep. Now, my wife's got some Tupperware containers that she's had out by the garden, and she's always having a problem with, no matter what we do, we get water into stuff. So I'll end up putting the lid on some hinges with some shocks so that it's easy to open, and she can use the interior of that as a dry space to keep all of her stuff that's currently getting wet. And it'll also make a good surface for a table because it's aluminum, and it is a well-constructed box. Hopefully you can see how thick that is. That's probably 1/16, maybe 1/8. That probably is 1/8 aluminum. And it's been reinforced all along the sides. When the military makes something, they spare no expense. And when they're done with it, they just throw everything away. It's a shame sometimes. That's why I ended up with it. Now I'm going to try to make it so that it just sits on something so I don't put any holes in the bottom. And like I said, my wife will be able to put her stuff in here and keep it out of the weather. Really keep it out of the weather. Well, I've got this little table right here, and I had my wife come out and we played around with the height for a while, and we figured that if it was 34 inches high, it would be low enough for her to put a pot on top and be able to put all the stuff inside of it, pot, plants, whatever. And also, if she opened it up, it wouldn't be so deep that she was having to bend over. So that means we need to make a base that's only 16 inches high, and then it will sit on top of that. So let's get some wood cut, screw it together, and make this base. Originally, I was using a 6x6 post, and I was going to cut that up for the legs. But if they're only going to be 16 inches high, I think that's probably overkill. So let's go with a 4x4 post. Well, once again, I'm using some reclaimed lumber. This 4x4 was out behind the barn, left over from some project, and I'm going to start by just cutting this in half so that way it's easier to manage. Then I'll cut my 4 16-inch pieces. Well, I know this sounds lazy, but I think the best part about having the miter saw on top of the platform, on top of the cart, behind the lawnmower, is I can just take all the scraps and throw it into the cart and all my mess is cleaned up as I go. I have learned that the two main advantages to recycling all my lumber is, first, it saves a lot of money, and second is I'm using my resources very wisely. However, the con to that is that you always have to sand the wood every time you want to reuse it. And that's another step that takes up some time. And I'm using 40 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to sand all these wooden pieces till I've got all of the, for lack of better words, older, drier, mildewy wood off the surface. So that way when I go to paint this, the paint can adhere to clean, fresh wood. The next few pieces of wood I'm going to cut will end up being for the width of the table and the length of the table, and I'll need 2 pieces of wood for each. I'll take one brand new pressure treated 2x6 by 10 foot board and cut 2 boards for the width and 1 board for the length of the table. Now, not all of my cuts will make sense, but what I am doing is I'm trying to eliminate any spots where there might be knots in the wood. After I made all my cuts, I took those 3 pieces of wood and lightly sanded them with that 40 grit sandpaper. Now all of this pressure treated wood has been stored so it doesn't get rained on, so I don't have to worry about the wood being wet. And this last board is also recycled, and it used to be part of one of the decks. Well, as soon as I have this board sanded up, we can go ahead and assemble the base. Well, this aluminum box is pretty light, and for the most part I can move it around by myself, but I think it'd be a lot easier just to get the tractor with the pallet forks out and put the box on the pallet forks so that I can raise this up to the right height to work on, and I think I'm probably going to need to clean it first too. On a sanding project this big, I probably would have been better off using my corded sander. I believe I went through 3 5-amp-hour batteries. Well, I got the box flipped over, and what was going to be the top had quite a few large gouges in it, but I was able to sand those out. So what I've been doing, I've been sanding it with 60 grit and then 220 grit. Now the 60 grit sandpaper really just gets all the imperfections off of the surface. But when I go back with that 220, it's almost like polishing it. It really brings out a shine to the aluminum. Well, the sanding continued for quite a bit longer until I had all 4 of the sides done, and I even cleaned up the inside of the box to some degree. Now I'm going to use 3.5-inch deck screws to hold all the wood for the base together, and the 2 boards that I cut for the width will end up having a 1-inch overhang on each side, or you could say I cut the board 2 inches shorter than the width of the box. Now because this wood has been sitting around for a while and is plenty dry, I'm going to end up drilling pilot holes for all my screws to make sure I don't split the wood. And I will put 3 screws in each one of the legs. Now I want to make sure I get my legs as straight as I can, and the only way I know to do that is to go get a square. So I've got my largest square out, and I'll use that to line things up before I put those last 2 screws in. The pressure treated 4x4 leg is only 16 inches tall. So the 2x6 with those 3 deck screws is more than enough to add all the structural strength we need. It's not going to require any additional bracing. So I'll just go ahead and move down to the other end and attach the other leg with a square and 3 more deck screws. This aluminum box was designed to be moved around with pallet forks, so it has 3 braces on the bottom that actually lift it off the ground. And you'll notice that when I'm putting this piece of wood on, it's actually sitting on top of that middle brace, and there's actually about 1.5 inch gap between that piece of wood and the flat aluminum bottom of this box. Next, I'll take the piece of wood that goes on each end and attach that. I'll line things up and put 1 screw in, and once I have that screw in, I can put the square onto the leg, drill 2 more holes, and put 2 more screws in. Once I've done that, I'll just repeat that 3 more times. Now to make sure that the box on top of this base stays in place, I'm going to end up taking 2 2x4s and lining it up on each side of that middle brace, and that should end up locking everything in, so to speak. So this black 2x4 is the only piece of wood that I was able to salvage out of the old table. It was the center brace. Now, just like usual, I don't have any plans for what I'm doing. It's all in my head, so a lot of times I will just sort of test fit or dry fit pieces to make sure things are going to be like I think they will. And that's what I'm doing right now. I just want to make sure that when those 2x4s were in place, that everything lined up. And now that I've done that, let's go ahead and get these screwed into place. I'll take my pencil and I'll mark where the boards are, so that way I can take my drill and drill some pilot holes for the screws. Once I have all 4 of these holes drilled, the only thing left to do is to line up the 2x4s and to put the 4 screws in. Now I'm going to end up painting this base, but I'm going to do it in the backyard. So once these screws are in, we'll take all this to the backyard and get everything set up. Well, whenever I'm going to do any paint, even if it's on the grass, I always put down a drop cloth. And this is just an old shower curtain that I'm using here. Alright, well this is the last thing I'm doing today, and I will pick this up tomorrow morning. Well, the last table was painted with some Rust-Oleum oil-based gloss black paint. And that does a really good job, but I've got a gallon of truck bed liner that's been sitting in the closet for probably about 5 years, and I think I'll give this a shot and see how it works. Well, it's really thick and it's not wanting to mix up very well at all. It feels like there's a big chunk of stuff at the very bottom of the can. That's not what was supposed to happen. Well, I solved that problem of having a big clump of bed liner in the bottom of the can. This is the reason why I put drop cloths down. Well, I wanted to use it up, but that's not how I wanted to use it up, that's for sure. What a mess I have managed to make. Well, accidents do happen and things don't always go right, but it's really what you do when accidents happen and things don't go right that defines you. So I've got some mineral spirits out and I'm just going to clean everything up, and as soon as I have my mess cleaned up, we will paint the base of this table with some Rust-Oleum gloss black oil-based paint. Well, 5 minutes ago I would have said I was going to have to throw this DeWalt tool away, but lo and behold. Well, that's definitely not how I planned for the morning to start off. But there's only one thing you can do when you're doing your own DIY, and that's just keep moving the ball forward. So let's finish cleaning the mess up and move on. I've got my gloss black Rust-Oleum paint this time instead of 10-year-old bed liner that I'm going to spill everywhere. Well, every time I'm painting anything that goes in the yard, it seems like I use those 2-inch disposable paint brushes. And after I got this painted and let it sit for about 45 minutes, it was dry enough to turn over so I could paint the bottom. I got a new 2-inch disposable paintbrush and went to work. Well, as the morning progressed, it steadily got windier. And I painted everything I could reach, and then I just kept an eye on it to make sure there's no leaves or anything that got blown into the wet paint. Well, while the paint was drying, I moved on to the aluminum box. To help keep the water out, I'd like to try to seal the edge around where the lid opens. And what I did is I rummaged through all of my leftovers and I found some leftover AC air conditioning window gasket material. So I will take this and cut it in half, and I'm just going to stick it to where the lid would close down and make a seal. Cutting that foam seal in half worked really well as far as making it the right width to go around the lid. But the sticky stuff that's on that foam tape just isn't sticky anymore. So I took off the foam seal and went and got a tube of caulk, and I put a small bead of caulk all the way around where the lid would close. And then I pushed the seal into the caulk and let the caulk be the glue that holds the seal in place. Well, the caulk seemed to work and it's holding down the seal, so I will go ahead and finish going around the rest of this opening and do it the same way. Put down some caulk and then put the foam seal on top of it. It wasn't necessarily easy, but with some effort I got it done. Alright, so now we got a gasket on there. It won't take long for the sun to dry that up. I got the gloss black paint out and another disposable brush and went ahead and put another coat of black paint on the base. So that means there's 3 coats on the sides and 2 coats on the bottom of the legs. Next, I put the lid back on the box and then I focused on the hinges and some handles. I went through all of my screws, nuts, and bolts, and I ended up finding some that I thought would work. And then I've got 3 hinges that are for a bifold door, and I'm going to use those for this lid. Well, I'm going to need to drill some holes for the mounting hardware, so I held the hinge up to the side of the aluminum box and marked it with a permanent marker. Normally I use a nail set for this, but if you want to make sure your drill is going to end up finding the center of where your hole would be, mark it by taking a sharp object and tapping it up against the metal. Then you can take the very tip of the drill bit and put it in that small indentation, and that'll make sure you drill the hole where you want it. Now I will do the exact same thing for the other hinges. Now when it comes to installing the hardware, I chose a drill bit that was almost the same size as the screws, so they don't really want to fit freely into the hole, but the aluminum is a really soft metal. So I found that I can just take a screwdriver and I can screw these into the soft metal of the aluminum without too much difficulty. And after I have the hinges in place, I'll open the lid up and put the lock washer and nut on the end of these screws. Well, I don't have any of those fancy shocks at the moment that will hold up this lid, but what I do have is a piece of scrap lumber. And if I cut this to the right length, I should be able to be like a backyard mechanic and hold this up like I would the hood of a car. That is a really good solution for the problem at the moment. Now let me get the lock washers and nuts on these screws. I just kept repeating this process until I had all the screws that hold the lid on tightened up and secured. I had a couple of leftover furniture handles that look like twigs, and I'm going to use these on the aluminum box. And then I will drill 2 holes using a, believe it or not, sheet metal screw as a drill bit into the aluminum lid, so that way I can attach that handle. I'll use a pressure treated screw like a scribe and mark the aluminum, and then drill another hole so I can attach this handle. And the drill I'm using is that same one that I spilt all the bed liner on. I don't know if it's working because it's a DeWalt tool or because I'm just so good at cleaning stuff up. Well, now that I've got those 2 holes in the aluminum lid, it's time to put that handle on. And I'll do the exact same steps to get the other handle on the other side. Well, I put the final touches on that box probably a week ago and got the video edited except for this part at the end, and it has been raining every day. Look how much standing water is in my yard. But the good news is our box doesn't care if it's raining at all. Well, there you go. You can see how the base is. And it's sitting on cement and pavers. And that's to keep the bugs from going up into the legs. And if you were worried about a hurricane coming through, you could still go ahead and latch the top so it couldn't come open. But these are my twig handles. I think they're pretty cool. And you just lift it up. I thought I was going to need to put some shocks in it, but it's really It's not heavy at all. And like I said, as much rain as we've had, there is not a drop in here anywhere. None at all. Oh, I forgot. There is one thing I did. I came back with some clear silicone, and I did a messy job. But I just went around the 2 hinges and got it all cleaned up. Well, there you go. That's a pretty good garden table. Hopefully this will help give you some ideas of what you can do around your house. But until next time, like, subscribe, check out my playlist, and I'll see you in that next video.